The letter arrived on a gray, overcast afternoon. Clara had been sitting at her small kitchen table, idly flipping through a book on Victorian architecture, an interest she'd picked up after watching too many documentaries on historic homes when she saw the envelope. It was thick, with an almost waxy texture, and the color was a deep blood red, faintly glowing in the dim light of her apartment. She'd been expecting bills, maybe a junk mail flyer or two, but nothing like this. Her fingers paused as they reached for it. There was no return address, no postage stamp, just her name written in a flowing script, the ink dark and almost impossibly neat. Clara Blackwood. She hesitated for a moment, then slid the envelope open with her letter, opener a dull but elegant silver blade passed down from her grandmother. Inside was a single, unfolded sheet of cream-colored paper, its edges decorated, with faint, swirling patterns that reminded Clara of ivy tendrils. She turned it over and read, "Dear Miss Blackwood, you are hereby invited to claim your inheritance, one that has been passed down through generations in the Thornwood family. The estate known as Thornwood Manor, nestled deep within the ancient woods of the Hawthorne Hills, now awaits your arrival. The manor, left to you by your late cousin Adelina Thornwood, has stood for centuries. It is a place of history, a reflection of our bloodline and our legacy. There is much for you to uncover should you choose to accept your birthright. Please arrive at your earliest convenience. The gates to Thornwood Manor will be open to you as of the date of this letter's arrival. We look forward to your visit. Yours. Sincerely, the Thornwood Estate Executors." Clara stared at the letter for several moments, her brow furrowed in confusion. Cousin Adelina Thornwood? She hadn't even known she had a cousin named Adelina, much less one who owned a grand estate in the middle of nowhere. The letter spoke of an inheritance, but Clara was certain her family had no wealth or connections to anyone named Thornwood. She had no memory of this side of her family at all. Her curiosity began to itch at the back of her mind, though. She had always dreamed of owning an old house, a place with history and character. Something like Thornwood Manor, if it truly existed, was the kind of place she'd imagined herself living in one day. The idea of it, of uncovering the hidden past of a forgotten lineage, tugged at something deep within her. It wasn't as though Clara had much to tie her to her current life. She worked as an editor at a local publishing house, her existence quiet, routine, and unspectacular. She had no partner, no close friends, and certainly no roots worth holding on to. A fresh start, a new chapter, how could she resist? The next morning, Clara packed a small suitcase and left for Thornwood Manor. She didn't waste time in questioning the authenticity of the letter. There was something about it, about the way it had been delivered, the weight of it, the wax seal that felt legitimate, even if the circumstances surrounding it were strange. The drive took longer than she expected. By the time she arrived at the gates of Thornwood Manor, dusk had begun to settle over the land, casting long shadows across the gravel road. The gates themselves were wrought iron, twisted and knotted, as if the metal had been contorted by years of decay. They stood tall and imposing, just barely able to open. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she approached the gates. The air felt different. Here, heavier, laden with something intangible. She pulled her car up to the gates and rolled down the window. A soft breeze stirred the trees, but there was an eerie stillness to the air, no chirping birds, no distant sounds of traffic. Just a thick, almost suffocating silence. A few moments later, the gates creaked open by themselves, as though an invisible hand had pushed them wide. Clara stared at them for a moment, hesitating. Was this normal? Was someone supposed to meet her here? But no one appeared, and the gates stood wide, as though inviting her inside. With a deep breath, Clara put the car in gear and drove through. Thornwood Manor was larger than she'd imagined. The house itself was tucked behind a veil of fog that seemed to cling to the hills surrounding it. The mansion loomed ahead, its Gothic silhouette casting long, thin shadows against the fading light. Its windows were dark, like eyes that had not blinked in years. The stone exterior was weathered and cracked, as though the house had aged faster than the world around it. Ivy crawled up its sides, twisting around the structure, choking the life out of it. The roofline was jagged, missing tiles, and the front porch sagged under the weight of time. The front door was open, inviting her in. No butler, no staff, no sign of life. Just the haunting silence of the manor. Clara stepped out of her car and walked toward the entrance. As she neared, the door creaked slightly, but no one emerged to greet her. She stood there for a moment, gathering her courage, before she pushed the door open herself. The hinges groaned in protest as she entered, and the scent of mildew and age wrapped around her like a damp cloak. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The grand chandelier above her was covered in cobwebs, and the floor was a mosaic of rotting wood, warped in places with the creak of every step she took. The walls were lined with portraits of somber-faced ancestors, men and women dressed in outdated finery, their eyes cold and unreadable. As Clara wandered deeper into the manor, she could feel the weight of the place pressing in on her. It wasn't just the age of the house or the gloom that hung in the air. There was something else here, something alive, though unseen. It seemed to wrap itself around her, tugging at the edges of her consciousness. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional soft creak of the house settling. The floors groaned beneath her feet as if the manor itself were breathing, adjusting to her presence. "Hello?" Clara called, her voice echoing through the halls. No response. She moved forward, her footsteps hesitant as she explored the grand staircase that led to the second floor. The wood was thick and polished, though it was chipped in places. The banister was wrapped in ivy, as if nature itself had begun to reclaim the space. Clara's curiosity deepened as she ascended. Each step felt deliberate, and a strange sensation gnawed at her, a mixture of awe and dread. The manor was beautiful in a way that made her skin crawl. It was as though the walls were whispering to her, beckoning her deeper into the darkness. Finally, Clara reached the second floor and approached the first door. She saw a large, ornate wooden door with a tarnished brass handle. It was slightly ajar. She hesitated again, but this time, something in her pulled her forward. With a steadying breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was grand, almost ceremonial. A large four-poster bed stood against one wall, its curtains tattered and long forgotten. But it was the desk by the window that drew Clara's attention. A single object rested on it, a letter. The wax seal was cracked, and the letter inside was written in the same elegant script as the one she had received. Her heart raced as she opened it, eyes scanning the contents. "Welcome home. Clara, I knew you would come." Clara's blood ran cold as the silence of Thornwood Manor pressed in around her. The house had been waiting, and now that she was here, there would be no turning back. The evening settled over Thornwood Manor like a shroud, the oppressive darkness swallowing the last traces of daylight. Clara sat on the edge of the grand four-poster bed in her room, staring out of the tall windows that overlooked the overgrown garden. The wind outside had begun to pick up, causing the trees to sway with an eerie groan, their twisted branches scratching against the glass like skeletal fingers. The manor, which had seemed so imposing and ominous from the outside, now felt like a giant slumbering creature. The house, with its dark wood paneling, antique furniture, and layers of dust, exhaled an almost mournful sigh with every gust of wind. Clara wrapped herself in the heavy quilt draped across the bed and tried to calm the storm of thoughts that swirled in her mind. How had Cousin Adelina known she would come? The letter, the manor's perfect stillness, it all seemed to ... orchestrated. But there was no turning back now. She had made her choice the moment she crossed the threshold, and yet the silence was thick, suffocating. It pressed against her as though the house itself were waiting for something to happen. Clara let out a shaky breath. She had to be imagining things. She was simply overwhelmed by the sheer strangeness of the situation. It had been a long day of traveling, and she hadn't eaten much. Maybe it was exhaustion playing tricks on her senses. She tried to push the creeping feeling of unease to the back of her mind and laid down on the bed, pulling the heavy covers up to her chin. She had to. As the minutes ticked by, the shadows in the corners of her room seemed to grow, stretching across the floor and walls like dark tendrils. Her eyes were heavy, but sleep refused to come. She tossed and turned, fighting the restlessness. Building in her chest, temperature in the room had dropped too, and she could feel the chill seeping through the blankets. Tightening around her limbs then, a sound, a soft creaking. At first, it was faint, like the sound of the house shifting as it settled, but it grew louder. The floorboards, somewhere in the hallway, just beyond her door, groaned under the weight of a heavy step. She sat up in bed, heart hammering in her chest, her ears strained to catch the noise again, but the house seemed to hold its breath. The creaking stopped. Clara felt her throat tighten. Maybe it was just the wind, she tried to tell herself that. But then the sound came again slow. Deliberate steps, like someone walking just outside her door. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was only the sound of her ragged breathing in the dark room. She swung her legs off the bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. Her pulse raced as she moved toward the door. The dim light from the hallway filtered through the cracks in the doorframe, but there was no shadow, no figure standing outside. Still, the feeling of being watched hung in the air like a thick fog. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. "Hello?" she called, her voice sounding small and weak in the vast silence. There was no answer, only the soft, mournful creaking of the house. Stepping cautiously into the hallway, Clara's breath hitched as she scanned the dark space. The air felt colder now, the house pressing in on her like a living thing. The flickering of an old wall-mounted lantern cast long, wavering shadows across the walls. She walked slowly down the hall, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight. Each step felt too loud, too heavy in the silence. Her eyes swept over the portraits that lined the walls. They were the same as the ones she had seen downstairs, somber, eyes following her every movement. Clara felt their gaze upon her like an invisible weight. Something about their stillness unnerved her, as if they were more than just images. Were they watching her? As she reached the end of the hallway, the temperature seemed to drop even further. Clara's breath fogged in front of her, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The corridor stretched before her in endless darkness, as if the house had no end. She glanced back at the staircase, but it seemed to have receded into shadow. The air was thick, heavy with something she couldn't quite name. Then she heard it. A soft, rasping sound, like someone dragging something across the floor. It came from behind the door at the far end of the hallway. The room there had been locked when she arrived, the door sealed shut with an ancient-looking key. But now, the sound was unmistakable, like something or someone was inside. Her heart raced, but she couldn't stop herself from walking toward the door. The rasping grew louder, the noise scraping against the wood like nails on a chalkboard. Clara reached out a hand to the door handle, but as her fingers brushed the cool brass, the sound stopped. A heavy silence followed, pregnant pause. Her breath caught in her throat as the quiet grew oppressive, suffocating. And then the whisper, a soft voice, as faint as a breath against her ear, echoed through the hallway. It wasn't in any language Clara could understand. It was a jumble of sounds, guttural, unearthly, and yet filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. She recoiled, stumbling back against the opposite wall, her heart pounding in her chest. The whisper continued, the words unintelligible but full of weight, as though it were calling her. The temperature in the hallway dropped even further, the chill biting into her skin. Clara's mind screamed at her to run, to leave the manor, but her feet wouldn't move. She stood there, rooted to the spot, eyes wide, her entire body tense, as if she were paralyzed by the very air around her. Then, the door at the end of the hallway, the locked door shifted. A soft click echoed through the house, and Clara's blood ran cold. The door was opening. The lantern flickered violently, casting brief, chaotic shadows across the walls. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the door creaked open. There was nothing, no figure, no monstrous presence, just a dark, empty room. But even in that silence, Clara felt it. The weight of something ancient, something old and hungry, watching her from the depths of the room. The whispering stopped. but the air itself seemed to pulse with the unspoken promise of someone waiting. Suddenly, the house seemed to lurch, and Clara's stomach dropped. The door slammed shut on its own, the loud bang echoing. Through the hallway, like a thunderclap, Clara stumbled back, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. She turned on her heels and fled back down the hall, her heart hammering in her chest as the shadows behind her stretched long and dark. When she finally made it back to her room, the door locked behind her with a finality that felt almost intentional. Her chest heaved with the effort of her panic. She could hear the soft wind outside, the rustling of leaves in the garden, but the house Thornwood Manor felt alive now, like it had awoken and it was waiting. Watching, Clara sank to the floor beside the bed, her back pressed against the door, her heart still racing. She didn't know what she had walked into, but she knew one thing for certain. Thornwood Manor had no intention of letting her leave. The morning light was weak, slanting through the dirty windows of Clara's room like a hesitant visitor. It was pale, cold, and indifferent. Just like everything else in Thornwood Manor, she'd barely slept. And every time she closed her eyes, the dark whispering from the hallway echoed in her mind. The strange, rasping voice, the door that had opened by itself, the chilling sensation that something was watching her from the shadows. Now, as she slowly pulled herself from the bed and crossed the room to the window, Clara realized just how isolated she truly was. The estate stretched out before her like an ancient, decaying beast's land swallowed by dense woods, its boundaries lost to time. The nearest town, if there was one, was miles away, and the roads leading in and out were narrow, winding, and unmarked. She had no cell signal, no landline. It was just her in this place. She needed answers. She needed to know what had happened to her cousin, Adelina Thornwood, and why she had been left this forsaken house as her inheritance. Clara dressed. Quickly in the clothes she had packed a pair of jeans, a thick sweater, and tried to steady her shaking hands. The remnants of last night's fear lingered in her bones, a cold, unshakable weight. But she couldn't stay locked in her room forever. She needed to explore. She had to understand what was happening here. She left the room feeling the same. Uneasy silence pressed in around her. The hallways of Thornwood Manor were vast, almost labyrinthine, with long corridors that twisted in unpredictable directions. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old wood, and the walls were covered in faded, yellowed wallpaper, their once vibrant patterns long since dulled by age and neglect. As Clara walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was quiet too. Still, it was as though the manor were holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. The faint sound of footsteps echoed behind her, soft but distinct. Clara spun around, her pulse racing. But there was nothing, no one. The hallway stretched out in both directions, the silence broken only by the creak of the old wood beneath her feet. Her throat tightened, but she told herself it was nothing. Just the house settling. The house was old, and old houses had a way of making you feel like you weren't alone. She pressed on. The library was located at the far end of the hall. A large, imposing room lined with shelves of leather-bound books. A perfect place to start her search. Maybe there would be something there, something that explained the Thornwood family's history, Adelina's life, her mysterious death. Clara opened the door to the library with a soft creak and stepped inside. The room was cooler than the rest of the house, and the air smelled of dust and age. Rows of bookshelves stretched high up to the ceiling, their contents packed tight. There was a long, polished desk in the center, an antique lamp casting a dim pool of light over a stack of papers. Clara walked toward it, her steps muffled by the thick carpet beneath her feet. As she approached the desk, she noticed the papers were scattered across the surface, old letters, faded photographs, and a large, ornate ledger. She ran her fingers over the yellowed pages of one of the letters, the ink blurred from years of age but still legible. It was a letter from the late 1800s, addressed to a Cecilia Thornwood, Clara's great-grandmother, if the name in the family tree was correct. The letter spoke of dark rituals and bound spirits. Clara felt a chill creep up her spine as she read the words, the sentences growing more unsettling with every line. The tone was one of dread, as though the writer knew something terrible was about to happen. She scanned a few more letters, each one more cryptic than the last, until she reached the ledger. It was thick, its cover worn, but it appeared to be in better condition than the rest of the papers. The pages were filled with neat, handwritten entries, each one more disturbing than the last. One entry caught her eye, and she leaned closer to read. January 13th, 1892, the ritual was successful. We have bound him. The house is safe for now. But I fear we have made a grave mistake. He is no longer a man. He is something else, something worse. I cannot speak his name, but I can feel him always watching, always waiting. He has become part of Thornwood Manor, and he will never leave. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she closed the ledger with a soft snap. A ritual, a bound spirit. The words burned in her mind, but before she could dwell on them any longer, the sound of creaking floorboards reached her ears once again. She glanced toward the door, her heart racing. This time, the footsteps were closer, and they were unmistakably human. Clara stood frozen, every muscle tense as she listened. The footsteps grew louder, more distinct, as if someone was walking directly toward the library. But when Clara looked around, there was no one in sight. Her eyes swept over the room, searching for any sign of movement, and that's when she saw it. A thin crack of light appeared beneath the farthest bookshelf. It was barely visible, but Clara could see it. The faintest flicker of something moving. Behind the shelves, she approached cautiously, her heartbeat thumping in her chest. Her hand reached out, trembling, and pulled the nearest book from the shelf. There was a soft mechanical click, and the bookshelf slid away, revealing a hidden doorway behind it. Clara's breath hitched. Was this some kind of secret passage? Is this how the Thornwoods had moved about the house? Or was it something darker? Without thinking, Clara stepped forward, entering the narrow corridor behind the bookshelf. The air here was thick with dust, the walls rough and jagged. The passage was barely wide enough for her to walk comfortably, and the darkness seemed to swallow her whole. A faint smell of mildew grew stronger, and the further she went, the more claustrophobic it felt. After what seemed like an eternity, the passage opened up into a small room, dimly lit by the flickering light of a single candle. The room was bare, except for a large old mirror standing in the center. But it wasn't just any mirror. The frame was intricately carved with twisted, grotesque faces, mournful, angry, and filled with sorrow. As Clara approached the mirror, she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck rise. Something was wrong with this mirror. It wasn't reflecting her as it should, distorted her image. The reflection warped and stretched, as if something was reaching out from the other side. Then, Clara saw it, a face that was hers, but not hers. A twisted, monstrous version of herself, smiling broadly, its eyes wide with madness. And her reflection was laughing. The room seemed to spin around her, the walls closing in as the laughter grew louder, echoing in her head. Clara stumbled backward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the reflection was gone. Her own face stared back at her wide-eyed and terrified. But Clara wasn't alone anymore. A figure stood behind her in the mirror, just out of view. She could feel its cold, malevolent presence, as though it was pressing against the glass, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And in that moment, Clara knew. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Clara's hand trembled as she backed away from the mirror. The reflection, or whatever it was that had appeared behind her, still haunted the edges of her vision. She couldn't look directly at it now, the memory of that grotesque smile gnawing at her insides. For a moment, she stood frozen, her heartbeat hammering in her chest as the silence enveloped the room like a heavy shroud. But as the seconds ticked by, Clara realized something had shifted. The oppressive darkness of the hidden room was no longer. Just a presence it was alive. She could feel it, thick and suffocating, pressing against her skin, her breath. The air felt colder than it had a moment ago, as though something was crawling up from the very depths of the house from beneath the earth itself. She turned and fled from the room, stumbling back into the narrow passageway, her pulse racing. The sound of her footsteps echoed eerily in the confined space, a reminder that she was utterly alone in this maze of walls, corridors, and secrets. As she exited the hidden room and emerged back into the library, Clara quickly scanned the shelves. There had to be something more, something that would explain what was happening, something that would give her a clue as to how she could leave this nightmare behind. She noticed that the air in the library had shifted as well. It felt thicker, like the entire room was closing in on her. The books, which had once seemed like lifeless objects, now felt as though they were watching her. A low hum seemed to pulse through the walls, vibrating in her chest, in her skull. Clara swallowed hard. She could no longer ignore the feeling that she was being watched, not just by the portraits on the walls, but by something far darker, far more malevolent. Something that had been waiting in the shadows for far too long. She stepped toward the desk once more, reaching for the stack of papers she had left untouched earlier. As her fingers brushed the top sheet, the hum in the air grew louder. And then, in the stillness, a voice spoke. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was clear, jagged, and full of sorrow. "Come to the basement, Clara. Come and see what you've been searching for." Clara froze. The voice was unmistakably human, but it wasn't the voice of her cousin, Adelina. It was colder. It's a distant voice that sent a chill down her spine. Her first instinct was to run to leave the house immediately, to drive away, to never look back. But she couldn't. Something was pulling her forward. Some force beyond her control, beyond her understanding, was guiding her deeper into Thornwood Manor. With shaky hands, Clara grabbed the letter from the desk and read it again. There had to be something, some clue she had missed before.
As her
Eyes scanned the words. She felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as though she had already read them in another life. It was a ridiculous thought, one that she quickly dismissed. But something was drawing her, tension, something she hadn't noticed before. The mention of spirits-bound spirits caught her eye once again. He has become part of Thornwood Manor, and he will never leave. The words were so final, so certain. It was as if the letter had been written by someone who knew what would come to pass. The basement. Clara's gaze turned to the floor of the library. Beneath the rug, she noticed something, an inconspicuous outline on the floorboards. Where the wood seemed slightly darker, she bent down to inspect it, running her fingers over the edges of the mark. It was a trapdoor. She hesitated. The basement. The voice had called her there for a reason, but was it safe? The last time she had listened to a voice in the house, it had led her into that hidden room with the mirror. Her stomach twisted at the thought, but she knew she couldn't avoid the pull any longer. With a deep breath, Clara moved to the corner of the library, pushing the heavy rug aside. Beneath it, the trapdoor creaked in protest as she pried it open. The hinges groaned, but it was no match for her determination. The smell of damp earth and stale air wafted up from below. The basement, her pulse quickened. Clara grabbed the lantern. From the desk, its soft light flickering as she descended the creaky wooden stairs into the darkness below. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the house was pushing against her, urging her to turn back. But the door had already closed above her. There was no going back now. The stairs seemed to go on forever, each step echoing through the quiet darkness. When she reached the bottom, she found herself in a vast, cold, stone-walled room. The floor was covered in layers of dust, and the air was thick with the stench of mildew. At first, Clara saw nothing unusual. But as her lantern light swept across the walls, she froze. There, carved into the stone, were words. Dark, twisted symbols. They seemed ancient, almost primal, and they crawled across the walls like vines. Wrapping themselves around pillars and beams, the symbols formed a pattern, one that seemed to shift the longer she looked at them, as though they were alive. Her breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary basement. This was a place of rituals, of dark magic, just as the letter had described. And beneath the symbols, Clara noticed something else. A circle of chairs. arranged in a perfect ring in the center of the room. She approached them cautiously, her heart hammering in her chest. The chairs were old, their cushions torn and stained with something that looked like blood. I want to do it. And in the very center of the circle, there was a large, ornate wooden chest decorated. With the same grotesque faces she had seen in the mirror upstairs, the chest, something about it called to her. Like the house itself was urging her to open it. Clara knelt before the chest, her hand hovering over the latch. The air felt charged now, as though the entire room was alive with an unnatural energy.
Ow.
With a deep breath, she undid the latch and lifted the heavy lid. The moment she opened the chest, a wave of cold air washed over her, making her skin crawl. But it wasn't just the temperature. It was the presence inside, the feeling that something ancient, something malevolent had been waiting for her to uncover it. Inside the chest, resting on a bed of black velvet, was a small, weathered book. It looked older than anything in the house, and its cover was etched with the same twisted faces that adorned the mirror and the chairs. Clara's hands shook as she reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed the cover, she felt a sudden jolt, as if the book had reacted to her touch. With trembling hands, she opened it. The pages were filled with more symbols, more cryptic text. But as her eyes scanned the first few lines, her blood ran cold. It was written in the same script as the letter she had received. It was a journal. A journal from someone who had lived here long ago, someone who had performed the rituals, someone who had bound the spirit that now haunted the house. And the journal's final entry was the most chilling of all. The spirit is awake. The ritual is complete. It cannot be stopped. He will come for her, just as he came for me. Clara Blackwood, you will be the next to join him. You will be his. Clara slammed the book shut, her hands shaking uncontrollably. It was too late to leave. Now, the house had already claimed her. Clara's hands were trembling as she held the journal, the weight of its words pressing down on her chest like a vice. The journal, with its cryptic messages and ominous forewarnings, had shattered whatever fragile sense of safety she'd clung to since her arrival at Thornwood Manor. The spirit, the rituals, the warnings. It was all too much to process, and yet she couldn't look away. She couldn't stop reading. She glanced down at the journal again, final words still echoing in her mind. Clara Blackwood, you will be the next to join him. You will be his. The sentence was a promise, a chilling, unavoidable truth. Whoever had written this had known, with unsettling certainty, that Clara would come to this house. The weight of the words almost felt as if they had been written with her in mind, as if this had been her fate all along. The thought made her skin crawl. The basement around her felt suffocating now, the shadows pressing in on all sides. The temperature had dropped again, and she could see her breath misting in front of her. The symbols on the walls seemed to shimmer in the dim light, as though they were alive, shifting with a purpose she could not comprehend. They were ancient, primal, and they felt wrong. Wrong in a way that made her want to run, to escape, to tear the book to pieces and forget everything she had learned, but she couldn't. Something in the back of her mind urged her to keep reading, to keep searching for the truth, no matter how horrifying it might be. Clara quickly turned the pages of the journal, her eyes scanning the text feverishly. The entries became more frantic as the author's descent into madness grew more apparent. The writing was jagged now, frantic, as though the person who had written it was losing control. February 2nd, 1892, the ritual was a failure. He is growing stronger with each passing day, feeding off the dark energy in this house. The walls themselves are bleeding, and I can hear him whispering at night. I know he is coming for me. He will claim me. He has already taken my soul.
Stop.
House is alive, and I am trapped here, trapped by my own folly. Clara felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. The more she read, the more she realized that the writer's fear had been justified. Whatever had been bound in this house had not been defeated, nor was it at rest. It had been growing, feeding off the darkness in Thornwood Manor, just as the journal claimed. And now it was calling to her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She could feel it now, presence. A cold, oppressive force in the air. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the atmosphere, but it was unmistakable.
Something was...
Watching her, Clara snapped the journal shut and shoved it back into the chest, trying to ignore the sense of dread that was crawling up her spine. She wasn't alone down here anymore. The walls, the shadows, they were closing in. As she backed away from the chest, her foot caught on the edge of the rug. She stumbled forward, her hands bracing against the stone wall to catch herself. Lantern flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance in time with her racing heart, and then she heard it. A soft, low chuckle, like a distant whisper, came from the farthest corner of the room. Clara froze. The voice was faint, barely audible, but it was unmistakable. The same voice she had heard earlier, the voice that had spoken to her in the library. The one that had urged her to come to the basement. It was a sound she could never forget, cold, mocking. And filled with an ancient malice, Clara spun around, her eyes darting across the darkened basement. But there was nothing there. Nothing but shadows and stone. The laugh echoed again, closer this time, as though the source were standing right behind her. She spun around, but still, nothing. Panic flooded her chest and her pulse quickened. She turned toward the stairs, her legs already moving before. Her mind could fully catch up. She had to get out of here. She had to leave. The air in the basement was too thick, too heavy. It felt as though the very walls were closing in on her, suffocating her, trapping her, as she made her way toward the stairs. The basement door slammed shut with a deafening crash. Clara whirled around, her breath caught in her throat. She knew. That door had been open. She had seen it with her own eyes. Now it was shut. The sound of footsteps echoed in the silence. Clara froze. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they were coming from the dark corner of the room. They echoed off the stone walls, reverberating through the floor beneath her. The shadows moved, shifting unnaturally as though they were alive. And then the figure emerged. It was tall, impossibly tall, with a hunched back and a gait that was disturbingly slow and measured. Its face was hidden in shadow, but Clara could feel its eyes on her. The air grew colder still, and the figure's outline seemed to shimmer as though it were made of smoke, of something insubstantial. But the presence it exuded was undeniable. It was not human, not anymore. It was something else, something old, something hungry. Clara took a step back, her breath shallow, panic clawing at her chest, and then it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here, Clara." The voice was a low rasp, full of an ancient hunger. It was distorted, as though it were coming from the depths of the earth itself. The very sound of it made her stomach twist. Clara's legs felt like jelly, and her heart pounded in her ears. She tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. The figure took another step closer, its presence swallowing up the light from her lantern. "You've disturbed what should have remained buried. You've opened the door." The words were a warning. The spirit, or whatever it was, knew she had uncovered its secret. It knew she had disturbed the peace, the ritual that had bound it in this house. And now it was coming for her. The air grew thick, as if the very basement were alive, reacting to the presence of the creature. The walls groaned, the shadows pressed in closer, and Clara could feel the temperature drop, the cold biting into her skin. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let this thing, this shadow, take her. She turned and ran, her feet pounding on the stone floor as she sprinted back toward the stairs. Her legs felt weak, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She could hear the footsteps behind her, steady, relentless, gaining on her with every passing second. She reached the top of the stairs, but as she reached for the door, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She screamed. Clara's scream echoed through the basement like a sharp crack, reverberating off the walls. But the thing behind her didn't flinch. Its cold, skeletal hand gripped her shoulder with an unnatural force, the pressure sending a wave of ice through her body. She spun around, eyes wide, but when she looked up, there was nothing human in its gaze. Its eyes were dark, empty sockets, like hollow voids reflecting nothing but the blackness of the room around her. Her breath caught in her throat. The shadows seemed to swirl around the figure, pulling it deeper into the darkness. And for a moment, Clara thought she had imagined it. Maybe it was just the fear, the oppressive weight of the house driving her mad. But then it spoke again, its voice like the grinding of stones, rough and hollow. "I was waiting for you, Clara. Waiting for the bloodline to return." Her heart thundered in her chest. This ... thing. It knew her name. It knew who she was. And that realization sent a jolt of pure terror straight through her. Her legs were frozen, as if the air itself was holding her in place. The hand on her shoulder tightened, and she winced in pain, but still, she could not move. The creature's presence was suffocating, wrapping around her like cold smoke. And then she heard it. It sounded so soft, so distant, it could have been mistaken for a trick of the wind. Laughter. It wasn't the deep, gravelly voice of the thing before hurt, was something else. A laugh so high-pitched and cruel it seemed to cut through the air itself. Clara's eyes darted around the room, looking for its source, but she saw nothing. Nothing except the ever-encroaching shadows that seemed to pulse and writhe, alive in their own right. "Who are you?" Clara finally managed to croak, her voice barely audible over the pounding in her ears. Her throat was dry, constricted from the fear gripping her. She didn't know if it was the thing that was speaking or if the house itself had begun to communicate with her. The creature tilted its head slightly, as though considering her question, before its lips twisted into something that could have been a smile if such a thing were even possible. Its teeth were black and uneven, jagged like broken glass. "I was once like you," it rasped. "I walked this house ... before the binding. But time is a slippery thing. Time in Thornwood Manor ... changes people." Clara's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure she understood what it meant, but the sense of wrongness settled deeper into her bones. This creature had once been human. Once. She tried again, her voice trembling but insistent. "Why me? What do you want with me? What happened here?" The creature's hollow gaze seemed to deepen, like a dark abyss opening before her. The shadows at the edges of the basement seemed to grow longer, as if feeding off the conversation itself. "The house remembers," it murmured, its voice dripping with something sinister. "And the house has chosen you. It's chosen you to finish what we began so long ago." Clara felt her stomach drop. She was beginning to understand, but it was a truth she wasn't ready for. The binding, the spirit. The thing that had been trapped in this house for generations, it was no longer just a lingering presence. It was alive, and it had been growing, feeding off the land, the decay of the house, the fear of anyone who dared to come near. And now it wanted her. Before she could gather her thoughts, the creature's hand shot out, its fingers icy and sharp, gripping Clara's wrist with inhuman strength. She gasped in pain as its grip tightened, but she couldn't pull away. "The house wants you, Clara," it said, its voice low and dangerous. "The house is alive, but only because of the ritual. The ritual that binds him here. Now you're part of it. You were bound to Thornwood Manor, just like I was. It's just like the others." Clara's head spun. The words made sense, and yet they didn't. She had no idea how she had become involved in something so terrible, but she had been drawn here for a reason. The laughter she had heard, the whispers in the walls, they weren't just echoes of a haunted past. They were part of something much larger, something that had been waiting for her all along. And the house. The house was a living, breathing thing. It wasn't a mere building. It was a force, a dark presence. Feeding off the rituals that had been performed within its walls, the creature's eyes flickered, narrowing with a strange gleam. It was studying her as though weighing something. In its cold, lifeless gaze, "But you are different, Clara," it whispered. "You carry the blood of the Thornwoods. Your blood. It will complete the circle." Clara recoiled, trying to twist away from its grip, but it was impossible. The shadows thickened, swirling around them like a storm of darkness, and she realized with a sickening certainty that this creature, this thing, was part of the house, part of the curse. Its presence was inseparable from the manor itself. She had been drawn into something far beyond her comprehension. "What do you mean? What blood? What circle?" Clara gasped, desperate for answers. The questions burned in her throat, but the creature's grip was unrelenting. The creature's twisted smile stretched wider, revealing more jagged teeth. It leaned in closer, its breath like ice against her ear. The blood of the Thornwoods is sacred, it murmured. Your ancestor, Cecilia Thornwood. She performed the first ritual. She bound the spirit to this house. She knew the price. She knew it was a sacrifice. Clara's mind raced. Her great-grandmother's name, the one she had seen in the journal earlier, was the key. Cecilia Thornwood. You've been brought here, Clara, to complete what was started. You are the final piece. The house has chosen you. Panic flooded Clara's chest. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be part of this twisted ritual. But the creature's hold on her tightened as it spoke, its voice vibrating with malice. And when you fulfill your part, Clara, when you give your blood, you will join us. The shadows shifted around her, closing in like a noose, and Clara knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she had no choice anymore. Thornwood Manor had already claimed her, and the thing standing before her, the one that had once been human, was only the beginning of what was to come. With every passing second, the house drew her deeper into its grasp. Clara's breath hitched. As the words reverberated in her mind like a death knell, the house has chosen you. The thought alone was enough to drive her to madness. She could feel the presence of Thornwood Manor in the air, thick and oppressive, its very walls alive with the energy of something ancient, something far older than anything she had ever imagined. The house wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, and now it wanted her. The creature that held her in its iron grip gave a low chuckle, its hollow eyes gleaming with an almost predatory satisfaction. It spoke again, its voice, jagged and cold, like shards of glass scraping against stone. You're already part of this, Clara. You've always been part of it. The house calls to you. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to break free, her body shaking with panic. The cold, skeletal hand that clutched her wrist seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, tightening with every attempt she made to free herself, but no matter how hard she pulled, it was as if her body was bound to the very walls of Thornwood Manor, the house refusing to let her go. "Let me go," she screamed, her voice cracking, but the thing before her merely grinned wider, its teeth glinting like shards of obsidian. "No, you cannot escape. Not now. Not when you've come so far." The laughter echoed through the basement, but this time it wasn't just the creature's mocking tone.
Ow.
There were other voices too, distant, faint, yet unmistakable the laughter. Of people long gone, the souls of those who had been trapped here just like her. The house had consumed them, one by one, until only their echoes remained. And now it was calling for Clara to join them. Clara's eyes darted around the room in desperation. The shadows were alive, writhing against the stone walls, reaching toward her like ghostly fingers. The symbols carved into the stone seemed to pulse, their dark energy radiating outwards. She could feel them, tugging at her soul, drawing her closer to the ritual. She was the key, the final piece in this twisted puzzle. "What do you want from me?" Clara gasped, her voice barely above. A whisper. The creature's grin widened as if it took delight in her suffering. "You are the last. The last of the Thornwood bloodline," it rasped. "Your ancestor, Cecilia Thornwood, began this ritual. She bound the spirit to the house, but it was never meant to end. She knew the price, and so did I. The house demands its tribute. And you, Clara, are the final sacrifice." Her blood ran cold. Cecilia Thornwood. She had known something was wrong. She had suspected it ever since she'd uncovered the old journal. The cryptic letters that spoke of binding rituals and spirits trapped within the walls. But to hear the words spoken aloud, to know that she was the last in the Thornwood line sent a chill through her that she couldn't shake. She stumbled backward, her head spinning. The ritual, the spirit, it wasn't just some myth. It was real. Cecilia's sacrifice had been the beginning of a chain of events. And Clara was now the final link in that chain. The creature before her stepped closer, its form growing more solid as it approached, the shadows twisting around it. Clara felt its presence inside her, clawing at her mind, trying to take control, to drag her down into the depths of whatever hell this house had become. "You can't escape your fate, Clara. The house has been waiting for you. For centuries." It has waited for the bloodline to return. Clara's vision blurred, the room spinning around her. She clutched at the walls, trying to steady herself. The laughter, the voices, everything was closing in on her, drowning her in a sea of madness. She had to fight. She had to escape. But where? There was nowhere left to run, and then she saw it. The door, it had been hidden behind layers of dust and cobwebs. But now, in the depths of her panic, it appeared as if it had always been there. It was a heavy wooden door, its edges adorned with strange symbols. But it was unlike any door she had seen in Thornwood Manor. It didn't belong to the basement. It was something different, something older, something forbidden. Her instincts screamed at her to turn and flee, but Clara knew. She knew this was the only chance she had left. She didn't understand what lay beyond that door, but she understood this. It was the key to stopping the house. It was her only chance to break free from its grasp. Ignoring the creature's mocking, laughter, and the suffocating pull of the shadows, Clara stumbled toward the door. The cold hand that had held her moments ago reached out again, but this time, Clara didn't hesitate. She slammed her body against the door, the force of it making her gasp. And with a deafening creak, the door slowly began to open. A chill swept over her as she stepped into the room beyond. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay. The walls were covered in more of the same symbols, carved deep into the stone. But they were different now. These weren't just marks, they were prayers. Prayers to the spirit, to the house, to something that had been summoned long ago. The door slammed shut behind her with an echoing thud. And for a moment, Clara thought she had made a terrible mistake. The room was darker than the basement, the shadows deeper, colder, but there was something else here.
Ow, something. Ow, wow.
At the far end of the room, a figure stood, bathed in the faintest sliver of moonlight that filtered through the cracks in the stone. It was an old woman, hunched and frail, her back bent as though weighed down by a great burden. Her hair was white, long, and matted, and her clothes were tattered, as if they had been worn for decades, perhaps even centuries. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the woman turned to face her. It was Cecilia Thornwood. "Clara," the woman whispered, her voice thin and broken. "You've come. I've been waiting." Clara stepped forward, her mind spinning. She had so many questions, so many fears, but all of them fell silent in the face of this woman. This ancestor who had bound herself to Thornwood Manor so long ago. "You can't stop it now, Clara. The ritual is already in motion. The house has chosen you, just as it chose me." The room seemed to close in around her as Cecilia's words settled into her mind. She had been right all along. The house was alive, and it needed her to complete what had been started long ago. Clara's legs gave out. She collapsed to the cold stone floor. The darkness around her thickened, the shadows reaching out for her, pulling her toward the center of the room. The door behind her slammed shut, locking her in. Cecilia's voice echoed one last time, the air heavy with the weight of inevitability. "The bloodline must end, Clara. Only when it does can the house be free." Clara's head spun as she sank to the cold stone floor. The words Cecilia had spoken reverberated in her ears like the echo of an ancient bell tolling in the distance. The bloodline must end. She could still feel the weight of the shadows, thick and suffocating, pressing in from every corner of the room. The walls seemed to pulse around her, the same strange symbols she'd seen all over the house carved deep into the stone. The air was heavy, oppressive, and the stench of decay, ancient and stagnant, clung to every inch of the space. Her ancestor stood before her, her eyes glassy, empty, as though the years spent in Thornwood Manor had hollowed her out entirely. Cecilia Thornwood had become a specter long before Clara had even been born, bound to the house by a terrible pact, cursed to live and die within its walls. Clara could feel the pull of the house now, an almost magnetic force drawing her in, dragging her deeper into its dark heart. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They were alive, breathing, shifting with a purpose. The whispers that had haunted her since her arrival grew louder, now indistinguishable from the murmur of her own thoughts. She was trapped. "You don't have to do this," Clara gasped, her voice breaking as she tried to stand. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed back to the floor, her hands scraping against the cold stone. The house seemed to mock her, pushing her down, forcing her to confront her fate. "There's no escape now, Clara," Cecilia rasped, her eyes cold and knowing. "The house has waited too long for you. It needs you. You're the final piece. You're the one who will complete the ritual and free it from its chains." Clara's mind reeled. This was madness. How could she be part of this? How could she possibly be the one to finish this cursed ritual? "But I don't want this," Clara cried, her chest tight with the weight of her desperation. She wanted to run, to scream, to claw her way out of Thornwood Manor, but the house wouldn't let her. It had her now. She was part of its twisted web. Cecilia's hollow gaze softened. Just for a moment, in a flicker of something like sorrow crossed her face. "You never wanted this, Clara, but you were born into it. The Thornwood bloodline has always carried the curse." The words sank deep into Clara's heart. The curse. It wasn't just some myth or superstition, it was real. It had always been.
Real?
From the moment her ancestors had first set foot in Thornwood Manor, they had unknowingly bound themselves to the house, to its dark and terrible spirit. And now, it was her turn. Why? Why did you do this? Why did you let this happen? Clara asked, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and sorrow. She was desperate for answers, desperate for some sense of understanding. But it was clear that no answer would ever make sense in this place. Thornwood Manor wasn't a home, it was a prison. Cecilia's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "I had no choice, Clara, no more than you do. The house takes what it needs. It's been hungry for centuries and it never stops. We thought we could control it, contain it, but the house, it controls us, has always controlled us." Clara's mind churned. The rituals, the sacrifices, it all been in vain. Her ancestor had tried to bind the house, to trap the spirit inside the walls, but it had only grown stronger. The house was alive, a living entity with desires of its own, and it was feeding off the blood of her family. "The house wants you because you are the last," Cecilia continued, her voice growing distant as though she were reliving some ancient nightmare. "The last of the Thornwood bloodline. Your blood, Clara, is the key to unlocking the final binding. You are the one who will free the house from the curse, from the spirit that haunts it." Clara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She couldn't do this. She couldn't be the one to complete this ritual, to end her own bloodline. She wasn't ready. She wasn't strong enough. But there was no choice. The house had chosen her. The moment she stepped into Thornwood Manor, the house had claimed her, had marked her as its own. She could feel it now, and almost suffocating, a sense of inevitability, force beyond her comprehension, pulling her deeper into its grasp. The shadows were closing in, and the laughter, the cruel, mocking laughter, echoed louder in her mind. She could hear the whispers of the spirits trapped within the house, the souls of her ancestors and others who had come before her, all trapped in an endless cycle of suffering. "You must do it, Clara." Cecilia's voice broke through the whirlwind of thoughts in Clara's mind. "Only by completing the ritual will you end it. You'll release the spirit and the house will finally be free. The house will no longer hunger for the blood of your family. But you must give everything, your blood, your soul." Clara's chest tightened as the weight of those words sank in, her soul. She was being asked to sacrifice everything for the sake of freeing this cursed place, and yet it felt like nothing more than a cruel trick, a trap. The house wanted more than her blood, it wanted her life, her very essence. But as the shadows thickened, as the whispers grew louder, Clara realized she had no choice. If she didn't act, if she didn't complete the ritual, the house would consume her, would claim her, just as it had claimed all of her ancestors, and there was no escaping it. Not now, not ever. With trembling hands, Clara reached for the stone slab in front of her. It was cold, slick with something that felt too much like blood, and it hummed with an energy that was both terrifying and familiar. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse, as if they were waiting for her. "What do I need to do?" Her voice hoarse. Cecilia's eyes darkened. "You must give the house what it craves. You must spill your blood upon the altar. Only then will the spirit be freed, and the curse will end." The words felt like a death sentence. Clara knew she was no longer just a part of the house's dark history, she was its future. She had become an instrument of its will. As she knelt before the stone altar, she felt the walls closing in around her, the very foundation of the house shaking with a low, vibrating hum. The spirits were restless, whispering in tongues she couldn't understand. The darkness swirled tighter, colder, and her heart raced as she braced herself for what came next. "It's time, Clara." And with that, Cecilia's voice faded into the ether. Clara's breath caught as the shadows began to move. She had no more time for hesitation. The house was waiting. Clara's hands trembled as she gazed at the stone altar before her, its surface slick and cold, marked with deep grooves where countless others had bled before her. The room around her was suffocating, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The house seemed to breathe with her, the walls closing in, the shadows creeping ever closer, as though it were alive and waiting for her to make the final choice. Her blood, her soul. The words rang in her mind like a funeral dirge. And yet she couldn't shake the sense that she had been walking this path long before she ever set foot in Thornwood Manor. It had been written in the bones of her family's history, carved into the very foundation of this cursed house. Her bloodline was bound to this place, and now she was the final thread in its unholy tapestry. "You must give what it demands," Cecilia's voice echoed in the distance, but Clara barely heard it anymore. The house was calling her now, a deep, insistent pull that seemed to come from within the very walls. She could almost hear the whispers of her ancestors, their voices rising from the dark recesses of the manor, urging her forward. Clara's pulse quickened. The shadows danced, their twisted forms reaching toward her like claws, clawing at her skin, at her very soul. She had no more time for hesitation.
House.
The house wanted her blood, wanted her sacrifice. And if she didn't give it, if she didn't finish what Cecilia had started, the house would take everything. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, but the pressure of the house, the weight of the spirits trapped within it, was suffocating. She could feel them, they were watching her. Shadows grew darker, and Clara realized with a sickening jolt that they weren't just shadows. They were souls. The lost souls of those who had been consumed by Thornwood Manor, trapped in the void between life and death, caught in an endless cycle of suffering and despair. She could become one of them. It was the house's promise, its threat, it had claimed. So many before her had devoured their souls, and it would do the same to her if she failed to complete the ritual. Clara's fingers brushed against the altar. It was warm now, like it had absorbed the heat of her own fear, and the stones seemed to hum beneath her touch. It was no longer an inert object. It was alive, a part of the house itself. It was waiting for her. "I don't want to be part of this," Clara whispered to herself. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was too late to turn back. There was no escaping Thornwood Manor now. House had already claimed her, had already intertwined her fate with its own. The bloodline needed to end. That's what Cecilia had said. And Clara understood now she was the last, the final piece. The house had chosen her, just as it had chosen her ancestors. Her blood would complete the circle, and the curse would finally be lifted. But at what cost? Her thoughts raced, tangled in a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and despair. She had been brought here by the same pull that had brought every other Thornwood before her. The house had chosen her, just as it had chosen Cecilia, and before her the countless others who had come to Thornwood Manor seeking refuge, only to be consumed by the darkness that lay within. The stone altar seemed to loom in front of her now, a gaping maw waiting to devour her. She could feel the house's hunger, its desire for her blood, for her life. And yet, in the deepest part of her soul, Clara realized something. This wasn't just about her sacrifice. The house wanted more than her blood. It wanted her soul. "The house is alive," she whispered to herself, the words finally clicking into place. It had always been alive. It had always been feeding. The ritual Cecilia had started all those years ago hadn't bound the spirit to the house. It had allowed the spirit to take root, to become one with the house, to grow stronger with every generation. The curse wasn't just a punishment, it was a trap. A way for the house to feed, to grow, and to claim the souls of those who dared. To step inside its walls, and Clara realized, with a sudden clarity, that she was the final offering. She was the last piece of the puzzle that would give the house its freedom, its release, and allow it to consume everything in its path. She could feel it now, the darkness inside her. The same darkness that had consumed her ancestors. It was clawing at the edges of her mind, whispering promises of release, of peace, if only she would give in, if only she would let the house take her. Do it, Clara, do it, and end it. Her hand trembled as it hovered over the altar. She could already feel the pull of the ritual, the power rising from the stone beneath her, the weight of the curse pressing down on her. There was no more time. For hesitation, do it. The command, the whisper of the house, filled her mind, drowning out everything else. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the blood rise into her head, the pressure building behind her eyes, as if her very body were fighting her. The altar's stone seemed to pulse, throb, as though it were waiting for her to spill her blood, to give herself to the house. The air around her thickened, growing dense with the spirits of the lost, their whispers now a roar in her ears. She could hear them now, each voice distinct, each one a plea for release, a cry for freedom, and yet Clara's hands stayed frozen. Over the altar, the weight of her bloodline's history, the weight of her ancestors' actions, hung heavy on her heart. But in the depths of that darkness, there was a flicker of resistance, her refusal to let the house claim her, to let the cycle continue. I am not like you, she whispered to the shadows. I will not be part of this anymore. Duh! The house seemed to shudder at her words. The shadows recoiled, and for a brief moment, the whispers quieted. And then, with a surge of resolve, Clara pressed her palm against the altar. The stone beneath her hand burned with the heat of the house's fury, but she didn't pull away. She felt the power of the ritual surging through her, felt the presence of the house deep within her, in her veins. But she didn't surrender. Clara lifted her other hand, and with a quick, decisive motion, she cut across her palm with the jagged edge of the stone. The pain was sharp, but she barely felt it as her blood began to spill, soaking into the altar, mixing with the centuries of other offerings. The house raged. The shadows exploded into violent motion, swirling around her, but Clara stood her ground. She wouldn't let it take her. She wouldn't let it take her soul. I will end this, she whispered, her voice rising over the cacophony of whispers, the shadows, the darkness. I will end this. The house trembled. The air in the room was electric, thick with the pulse of Clara's blood as it soaked into the altar stone. Her hand burned where she pressed it, as though the house itself had reached out to claim her, but she refused to pull away. She felt the power of Thornwood Manor coil around her, dark energy spiraling in her veins, the shadows crawling up her arms, trying to drag her under. No, Clara gritted her teeth, forcing the thought into her mind. I won't let it take me. Not today. Not ever. The house rumbled beneath her feet, an ancient growl of displeasure reverberating through the walls. The shadows thickened, suffocating, but Clara's resolve only hardened. She would not be the final piece in its cursed puzzle. She would not give the house what it wanted. A low, guttural laugh echoed in the room. Cecilia's form, once frail and broken, now loomed larger, her eyes gleaming with a cruel satisfaction. The house had claimed her, twisted her spirit into something almost unrecognizable. She was still bound to Thornwood Manor, a hollow shell of a woman, her soul lost to the very darkness she had sought to control. You think you can stop it, Clara? Cecilia's voice was a rasping whisper like dry leaves being torn apart in the wind. The house has always claimed us. We're part of it now. The bloodline your bloodline is bound to it. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She could feel the weight of Cecilia's words, but beneath the fear, beneath the suffocating pull of the house's power, there was something else, something fierce. something primal. She wasn't alone. The spirits of her ancestors, those who had been lost to the house before her, had not all been consumed by it. There was a flicker of them left in her, their strength, their resistance. She could feel them pushing back. "I'm not like you." Clara's voice rang out, louder than she had ever spoken before, as though her words could shatter the dark grip. On her soul, "I won't be like you." The shadows recoiled, a violent shudder tearing through them. The stone altar beneath Clara's hand quaked, the symbols etched into its surface glowing with an ominous light. For a moment, everything was still. The air hung heavy, as though the very house itself were holding its breath. And then, as though in answer to her defiance, the house erupted. The ground trembled beneath Clara's feet, and the shadows exploded into chaos. They lashed out at her, sharp tendrils of darkness twisting and writhing, reaching for her like claws. Clara staggered back, her heart racing, but she held her ground, refusing to let the house swallow her whole. This is it, she thought, her body filled with a sudden clarity. The final reckoning. She was fighting not just for her own life, but for the souls of those who had come before her, for every person, every ancestor, who had been lost to Thornwood Manor's hunger. They were all counting on her. She willed the strength of her ancestors into her, willing herself to stand taller, to face the darkness head-on. The house had tried to break her for so long, had twisted her every step. But Clara knew, deep down, that she had one weapon the house could not defeat. Her choice. Her blood still dripped from her palm, soaking into the altar stone, mingling with the ancient offerings of her ancestors. The ritual had begun, but it was still hers to control. Her blood, her choice. Clara closed her eyes and focused, drawing every ounce of willpower she had left. The walls of Thornwood Manor were closing in. But instead of surrendering to its suffocating weight, she reached into the core of herself, into that deep well of resistance, and called on the one thing the house could never have: freedom. With a surge of energy, Clara raised her hand from the altar, clutching the stone in her palm. The shadows hesitated, recoiling from the light of her defiance. She could feel the spirit of Thornwood Manor, its hunger, its rage, its insatiable need to consume pounding against her, but she refused to give in. "I choose my own fate," Clara whispered, her voice a low, trembling promise. "I choose to end this." With that, she slammed her hand onto the altar once more, her blood soaking deep into the stone. The house trembled again, this time with more force, as though it were screaming in fury, trying to hold on to its last vestiges of power. Clara's vision blurred as the stone beneath her hand pulsed. And in that moment, she felt a rush of cold air, like the house was breathing a final sigh of release. The darkness shuddered, its claws weakening, its presence beginning to fade. The shadows that had once sought to consume her began to recoil, shrinking back, retreating into the corners of the room, and then the house went silent. The oppressive weight lifted from Clara's shoulders, and for the first time since she had entered Thornwood Manor, she could breathe freely. The air was clearer, less suffocating. The whispers of the lost souls faded, and the shadows that had plagued her every step retreated into the corners of the room. Cecilia's form wavered before her, her once strong figure now crumbling like dust. She looked at Clara with eyes that were filled with both sorrow and relief. "You've done it," she whispered, her voice softening. "You freed us." Clara staggered back, her knees buckling beneath her. She felt the power of the house fading, retreating into the ether. The curse had been broken. The ritual had been completed, but not in the way the house had wanted. Clara had made a choice, her choice. And in doing so, she had severed the bond between her family and the manor forever. The manor itself seemed to groan in response, as though it were unraveling, its grip on the world slipping away. The walls, once alive with dark energy, cracked and crumbled. The stone altar beneath Clara's hands splintered into dust, its power spent. The house, the spirits, the curse, they were all fading, retreating into the shadows of history, and then there was nothing. Clara stood in the center of what had once been Thornwood Manor, her breath ragged, her hands trembling.
Eyes red.
No longer alive? It was no longer a prison. It was just a house, empty, broken, and silent. She had done it. She had freed herself. In doing so, she had freed her bloodline from the house's insidious grip. The curse was no more. But as Clara stepped away from the ruins of the altar, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house would never truly be gone. It had lived for so long, feeding on the souls of the lost, growing stronger with each passing year. Would it ever truly die? Or had she just delayed its inevitable return? For now, though, the house was silent. And Clara was free, but the shadows would always remain, lurking just beyond the light.